Hello friends and welcome back to the channel. I'm Nick and this is MSFS Flight Plans, a place where my only objective is to give you one more reason to get up in the air again and again as we check out the coolest sights on the ground in the entire world and the most interesting sights. So what I do is I spend a day or two, or 3 or 4 in the case of this flight, and I try to learn as much as I can about what we'll be looking at along the way so we can all enjoy a nice personal, informative, guided tour of everything we'll be looking at on the ground. And today is going to be one heck of a member-recommended flight. We're going to be leaving from Richmond, Virginia, and I've been wanting to fly around here anyway because I wanted to check out all the big ports and the shipyard and all that down in Norfolk. So we'll fly here from Richmond down to the coast in Norfolk, and between here and there, it is just non-stop action. There's tons of history. We got battlefields and forts and, a speedway, mansions, of course, downtown Richmond, which is the capital of Virginia. So all kinds of neat stuff to see, and we're even going to have 2 craters, if you can believe that, and one of them is man-made. So we'll cover all that as we go along. Total flight will be about 153 miles, and as always, I will have this exact flight plan linked in the video description so you can pull it into a little NavMap and then right over into the sim if you want to take this exact flight. And it'll probably be about an hour in the air. The sim told me it'd be around 40 minutes because we're in the Caravan, which can get going pretty quick if it wants to, but we'll be slowing down some, so I'd say it'd probably be less than an hour. And let's go ahead and get going. And I got called out on my last flight, that Alaska flight. I know some of you guys really like to see the full proper startup procedure, and I like doing it too most of the time. But it's funny, this is the 3rd sim channel that I've had, and the gripes I got from my other sim channel when I had it, from most of the folks, was that they did not like the time it took me to get up in the air. Because I was doing tours and stuff like that. It wasn't all about tutorials, you know, we don't do that on this channel. So after getting scolded a few times for taking too much time on the tarmac and the apron, I started just trying to get the planes going as quick as I can, but you guys let me know if you like to see the full proper as close as I can get to the actual startup procedure. Let me know and we'll try to follow that a little bit closer. Going forward, I want to try to please as many people as I can. If I just did what I like to do, it probably wouldn't be nearly as entertaining. So let me know what you think. I'll adjust to taste for whatever you guys want to see. I can do all of it, and I like doing all of it. Alright, so we're powered up here. We got our condition lever full. That's good. We can turn this back down to normal. Turn our starter off. Get our CDI adjusted. We'll be flying with autopilot, of course, and I felt like the good height for this, the good altitude is about 3,000 feet. My first flight was 2,000, then I tried 2,500, and I think 3,000 is going to be just about right for this one. So just a heads up, it'll depend on what plane you're into. I found that makes a bit of a difference as well. And I have the weather set to the high cloud setting, and I think it's around noon. So this airport we're leaving from is Richmond International, Kilo Romeo India Charlie, and we're flying into Norfolk International, which is Kilo Oscar Romeo Foxtrot. And there are payware add-ons available for both airports, no freeware, unfortunately. But since I don't like spending a lot of money on airports, as you guys know, I spend all my money on scenery add-on packs. I usually don't get the airports unless for some reason we're going to be spending a lot of time there. But there are a bunch of freeware add-ons for this area, so I've got included in the video description the add-ons for the city of Richmond, and then some stuff down by the ports. And when you look at the names of the files, you'll see that not one of them's for like San Diego, and I think there might be another location in there too. And let me get going, then I'll tell you why that is. All right, 1 notch of flaps. And let's go. All right, turn our taxi lights off, landing lights on, just so we get to the end of the runway. I would love to appease all the guys that are sticklers for proper procedure. And again, if I wasn't trying to talk and read notes and think about what I'm recording here, I would follow it much more closely when I do my private flying time. I'm also a stickler for procedure, but it's just a little difficult to do that and what we do on this channel, but I'm going to try my best. So when you see all the add-ons for this, stick all of them in your community folder. And the reason why there are some that do not, or aren't the places that we're flying over is because some of the static elements that the developer was using for the ports are at some other locations, so just throw all of it in there, and of course when you're done you can just take it right out if you want to. Alright, once we get to the end of the runway, I'm going to throw the autopilot on, and then we can start talking about all the stuff we're going to see, because we have got a lot. Most of the scenery looks really good. The only thing that I would gripe about is that despite Richmond being touched up, you know, the buildings and stuff, some of the bridges down by that area don't look fantastic. I don't think they did the bridges. But most of the other bridges are going to look pretty good. Alright, autopilot set up. And we'll get up to about 3,000, we'll be good. And I think I've found what the common denominator is for the sketchy looking bridges. You know, I'm always griping about them, and you know I absolutely love really well done bridges. And I think what the deal is if it's not a flat bridge, I think the AI can handle flat bridges okay, even though they might not look true to life. At least they don't look funky looking, like a block lane across the water. But if anything has like a truss bridge or a suspension bridge where stuff's going up in the air, I think the AI struggles to remove the stuff in the spaces between all the little intricate details. So I think that's what's going on. So all of our short flat bridges will look pretty good. Anything that's bigger, not so good. But all the rest of it's going to look pretty neat. And just a heads up for some of the forts that we'll be looking at, this was a real hot spot during the Civil War for reasons I'll tell you about once we get to that. But a lot of the forts out here are earthwork forts, so they're hard enough to see because they're dirt, and some of them are down in parks that are surrounded by trees, so I'll show you where they are, and when we get to the end, we'll look at the satellite map as usual, a little nav map. And of course, I'll tell you about them as we're going over it. So some will look pretty good, some will be easy to tell they're forts, some not so easy. Most of the rest of them will be pretty good. All right up here on our left, we have Richmond Raceway, which is this right up here, and I don't think that was part of the modification pack, though you can definitely tell what it is when you get out there. And that's also known as America's premier short track and the action track. It's a 3/4 mile D-shaped circuit that can host up to 51,000 spectators, who, while they're there, can enjoy the largest jumbotrons in America, situated around that central scoring tower, which you can just kind of see poking up here, and we're going to come around this way so you'll get a better look at it. That track was opened in 1946, and it was originally a half-mile dirt oval until they reconfigured it to the current setup in 1968. And because I have just a hair of a morbid curiosity, of course I had to see if they'd had any fatalities there, and they hadn't, not for the NASCAR series. And I didn't really look beyond that. I don't know how many other races they have there, but I bet it's a lot. And what I actually found was a list of all of the NASCAR fatalities, and I was surprised there's only around 31, 32 maybe. And by far, the track that had the most was, want to take a guess? It was Daytona, which we checked out in our Daytona flight. That looks pretty neat, huh? And I bet it is action-packed. I mean, you got bleachers all the way around that thing. And so I think they do the scoring and stuff up there. And I told you on that Daytona flight, I've only been to 2 races, even though we only live about an hour and a half north. And I'm not a huge race fan, but I thought it was really cool. And the coolest part of the whole thing was that you can rent these little headsets that you can tune into whatever drivers you want to listen to. Let's get our landing lights off. And listen to the pit crew, talk to the drivers and all that. I thought that was just really fascinating. And of course, what everyone's there for, waiting to see a wreck happen. So look at that. That residential area looks good. All these little schools just look wonderful. We're going to see lots of softball fields. Everybody in Virginia loves softball. All right, let me get our throttles dialed in. I'm gonna try to kind of take it to the hilt. I'm gonna keep our prop pitch up pretty high until it warns me not to, so we can cruise right along here. So this little thing here is called the Diamond, and that's a minor league baseball park, home to the Richmond Flying Squirrels, and those guys are affiliated with the San Francisco Giants. And I think this is also used by the Virginia Commonwealth University, which is not right next to it. I think I remember on the map it was a little bit further out here. And I think this is their athletic field here as well. But then there's another one over here, so maybe that's used by a high school, I don't know. Maybe they need 2 fields. And we're going to get a little popping here because I'm not sure how far out the add-on for downtown goes out here, but you know how that is. When there's add-ons, we'll get a little bit of popping, but not too bad. And if you can see it, and we'll get a better look at it as we get closer, this thing sticking up right here is a tower that's on the complex of the Virginia War Memorial. And that houses what's called a carillon, which is a new vocabulary word for me. And that is any series of playable giant bells that exceeds 23 bells, and that one has 66. And I had to, of course, check out a video for that, and they play it with something that looks like, if you've ever seen anyone play an organ with pantyhose and no shoes on, you know they play that little bottom part with their feet, those little sticks that hang out there? Well, the whole thing is like that, but you play it with your hands. And I didn't think to look to see if they had a live shot of anyone playing it, so I'll have to look for that. And this big area out here contains the Maymont Mansion and Estate, and the mansion's going to be right here, and maybe when we come around the other side, on one of my test flights I got a good view of it, and it looks like it should. But that was built on about 100 acres overlooking the James River here, which is what's going to run right by downtown Richmond, by a guy named James H. Dooley and his wife Sally Mae, after which the place is named. And they donated that property very generously to the city after they passed away, and they've since put a little botanical garden, I think a little children's zoo, things like that down there. And once they were done, they were buried right here in Hollywood Cemetery, which also has a couple of semi-presidents in it. And I say that because one of them was Jefferson Davis, who is, of course, the president of the Confederacy, and, of course, the capital was Richmond in Virginia when the Civil War was going on for the South. And then also John Tyler. And he's an almost, well, he was a president. He was the 10th president, but he's the first that succeeded a president in office because the president died. When William Henry Harrison died of pneumonia after only 32 days in office, making that guy the shortest serving president in U.S. history. So Jefferson Davis is right down here, there's a little rotunda, and then Tyler's over here in this area. And if you could see into the river, it looks really cool here. There's like rocks and stuff. They almost look like little rapids going through there. You can see these flat bridges look okay. Some of the other stuff closer to the water, not so good. And then here's the Capitol building here. They have their Coliseum, and I don't know who plays in that, or maybe they just use, you know, different entertainment venues, but I couldn't see when I clicked on it. It was just like ticket sales and things like that, so I couldn't see if anyone regularly plays in there, and I'm not a huge professional sports fan, so maybe I should know that, but I don't. Let me know if you know, if you're from Richmond. And on that note, of course, I'm not from here, and I've never even personally driven through here, so surely I'll get some of this wrong. And let me know if that's the case. Correct me down in the comments. The more I learn, the more I enjoy it. So that Capitol back there was completed in 1788, and it is the 8th Virginia State House, if you can believe that. Apparently most of the previous ones succumbed to the great destroyer of all old buildings, which is, of course, fire. And as we're about to discover, Virginia has been around for a long time as far as American history goes. Their first capital was established in 1619 down in Jamestown, which we'll see in just a bit. So this area has had people living here for quite a while, Europeans anyway. Well, probably Native Americans way, way before that. We'll talk about them just a little bit in a moment. So there's Richmond International, where we took off from. Right from down there is where we were parked. Pulled over to our runway and headed on out. They did a really nice job with the scenery down there. Not only the buildings, but the houses, the residential areas. Very believable. Quite immersive. I like it a lot. Alright, so we're going to turn towards the southwest here in just a second. And we're going to see a couple of forts, Civil War forts. And their battlefields. And this area, as I mentioned before, saw tons of action during the Civil War, being right along the most contested border between the North and the South. And as you American history buffs know, Richmond, of course, was the capital of the Confederacy. But it's only about 50 miles south of D.C., which was, of course, the capital of the North. So you can imagine there's probably quite a bit of static in this area, those guys being so close to each other. So this first one that we'll see is really going to look like an open spot in the woods, because it's just earthworks. And that's going to be Fort Harrison, later named Fort Burnham. And that was one of the few that we'll see that's still standing that was originally a Confederate fort, and they built that in defense of Richmond. And it was captured by Union forces in September of 1864, led by none other than Benjamin Spoons Butler, who was that guy that stole all the local silverware when he captured New Orleans. And if you saw that New Orleans flight, you know who I'm talking about. And I will again reinforce the idea that you should absolutely Google Benjamin Butler and see what he looks like. Because if you just imagine in your mind someone that would steal spoons, that's him. Alright, so once we flatten out, we should see this place. And a little further south, we'll see the remnants of Fort Hoke. I'll tell you about that in just a second. So this is the fort right here. That's the one that became Fort Burnham. And the Union took that over. Hoke is around here somewhere. And when you see it on the satellite map, it's like in somebody's backyard. It's crazy. And there's a little like pathway that I think is part of the park that goes over to it. And it may even be some of the original trench lines that they kind of cleaned up and dug back out. So after the Union forces took the place back behind us now, they came down here, took Fort Hoke, suffering a lot of casualties along the way. But they decided they'd rather have that first fort, so they went back up there, and the Confederates wound up coming back down and taking old Hokey Pokey. And this was really the start of true trench warfare right in this area. The Union was creating a siege of Richmond, not like the sieges we learned about when we were doing the UK tours where they just try to starve everybody out, but they were trying to create a railroad blockade from this direction. So the Confederates were on this side, the Unions were on this side, and they were trying to keep the railroad traffic from getting to Richmond. So they dug this huge line of trenches. We'll see some more forts that were along that line originally. And that's what this was all about out here. Really nasty. It was the precursors to what would happen during World War I. And I'm just going to mention this big power plant up here. This is called the Chesterfield Power Station. And as you're going to see, the detailing down here is just amazing. And I'm going to guess it's probably coal-fired because there's a big mound of coal out there, but they also have some tanks over here, so maybe they got a little oil/gas generator going over there too. But look at the detailing down here with all these power line pylons. Really well done. And the water lines look good. Really good. Other than right back there down by Richmond where, you know, they had some trees and stuff growing in the middle of it. But that's actually kind of accurate because there is some ground that sticks up through the water. Look at this place. Crazy. That bridge looks great. And there's a historical park up here that I didn't think to see what it was all about because there's so much to see around here. I just had to skip some of it. But I'm curious if this is a former landfill because it looks like a lot of the other sites that we've seen that are reclaimed landfills where they pile up dirt over all the trash. Usually put a few smokestacks up there that burn off the methane. I'm betting that's what that is because there's nothing else out there but that. Okay, this thing up here is really cool. This is a big prison complex, and they've got a max security, medium, and then a low security prison over here. But on the other side of that, this is an area called a munitions and recovery training facility, which we'll get a much better look at in a second. And I don't know what they do down there, but I bet it's pretty cool because this area right here is a big dirt track, and it's not an oval. It's like all crisscross and everything. You'll see what I mean. But I'm wondering if it's like prisoner recovery since it's right next to all the prisons. And then over here, much like that shooting range that we saw out on our chateau tour in France, they did a good job detailing that too. You can see all the little berms and everything. Out there, that bridge looks fantastic, doesn't it? There's some more softball fields. Can't get enough softball out here in Virginia. Alright, so that's the max. You can always spot the maxes because they're all real close together, and they definitely don't have any athletic fields, which you'll see at the medium security. And then the low security kind of looks like a little mini resort. So there's the medium there. There's their athletic fields. Man, that place might not even have a yard. How are the guys going to lift weights and play basketball? I don't know if you can do that at a max prison. Well, these guys got... well, they have a little mini track there and everything for the low security guys. So here's that track here. Look at this thing. Can you imagine what they do out there? And then there's a shooting range over there. Pretty cool. Alright, up next we're going to see the Petersburg National Battlefield, made famous by the siege of... I don't know if it's... yeah, it is Petersburg. I almost said Peterson. The siege of Petersburg, which lasted almost a full year from June of 1864 until the following spring. And again, they were trying to just build a line of trenches all the way around it. Not to necessarily keep everybody in, because the Confederates could retreat back this way if they wanted to, but just keeping the supplies out that were coming from the east. So these fortifications started going up after Union General and future President Ulysses S. Grant assaulted Petersburg and failed. And then they created all these trenches going along here. And it was successful, creating the siege anyway. And that was the start of General Lee throwing in the towel and saying, well, I think I'm done fighting. And we're along the Appomattox River here. If you keep following it the direction we're facing now, you'll get down to the Appomattox Courthouse, which is where that whole thing kind of wrapped up as they surrendered and all the treaties were signed. So here's one of the forts right here. And this is Stedman, I believe. And then this one down here is Haskell. And then the trench line would have run all the way along this way. And right here, there's a little park that's just called the Crater. And what happened there, if you're not a big Civil War buff, if you are, you probably already know. Ooh, it looks like some more earthworks over there. The Union had some old Pennsylvania miners. They were getting an itch to do some digging, so they decided this is where the Confederate lines were here, and they could not break through. I mean, it was just total just gore and bloodshed as they were trying to knock these lines out. So these miners said, well, you know what, we'll just dig a big tunnel underneath the lines and blow up a bunch of TNT, which they did, and they broke through the lines. But when the Union charged, all the guys got stuck down in the giant crater and were just slaughtered. So they had to pull back, and that was a colossal failure. But all the efforts down here were a big part of ending that war, so in one weird way or another, it was probably worth it. Alright, we got two more forts coming up here, and the first one will probably be the most well-defined of the earthwork style that we'll see on this flight. But we're going to see something far more impressive than these before we land, once we get down by the ocean. You probably know what I'm talking about if you're from the area. So these are going to be Forts Fisher and Welch. And Fisher, which is going to be to the east, is the largest of all the installments that they built along the Union lines. And this place had 2,000 feet of parapet and 19 cannon installations. And we should spot that here in just a second. But it kind of just looks like a big grassy field now. But you'll be able to tell it was a fort for sure. And then Fort Welch, well, Welsh is a good bit smaller. All right, where are you? There it is right down there. See it? It's hard to spot because it's the same color as that field, but you can see the little points coming out there. And then here's Welsh. And you can kind of see they've got some little lines dug here, so I don't know if they left some of the trenches that you can... Well, they wouldn't have left them, but maybe redug the trenches. I bet that stuff faded into history pretty quick once the war was over. But that's them. And that'll be it for the old Civil War forts. But don't worry, we've still got some Revolutionary War stuff we're going to see. And then another pre-Civil War fort, which is going to be the best of them all that we'll see. But we've got to head back up the James River, which we're going to follow all the way down to Norfolk. And we're going to be exploring some more of the oldest European history in America along the way. Checking out a few more interesting military spots, and amusement parks, some tunnels. We've really got it all in this flight. Look how good that scenery looks. Boy, that is true to life looking, isn't it? That is just incredible. But we've got a stretch of about 30 miles of countryside here, beautiful countryside to cover before we get back into the action. So I've pulled up some Virginia trivia for our in-flight entertainment. And before we get to that, I got to tell you a personal story that happened this week that maybe will enrich us all and reveal my ignorance, which I'm always all too keen to do. So I used to teach a class at my church years ago, well, a couple years before COVID, and I taught for about 20 years. And as you can imagine, if you've watched my flights, it was a pretty cool class. If you can imagine me in a religious setting and how I usually go about thinking through things, people seem to enjoy it quite a bit, and so did I. But there was a guy that was in the class that I kind of stayed in touch with, an Indian kid, and he would call me up, not Native American Indian, the other kind. And he had stayed in touch with me, and he called me about a year ago, just kind of updated me on what's going on, and he was always lamenting that he was a single guy and was worried about getting older and getting married and all that. And he called me to let me know that he had met a girl that he was just absolutely enamored with. And I said, well, where'd you meet her? And he said, well, she's in India. And I said, oh, have you gone to see her or anything? Is she coming over here? Are you going over there or what? And he said, no, we're just kind of doing like Zoom meetings and stuff like that. And she was an engineer out there. She got an engineering degree. I was like, well, that's great, man. I'm happy for you. And he called me about 6 months ago and said, well, I'm engaged. I'm getting married. And I said, oh, that's great. Did your fiance come out here? And he said, no, we actually still haven't met face to face yet. And I thought, okay, this is maybe one of those arranged marriage things. And I didn't ask that, of course, at the time, but I was wondering that the whole time. So she did come out here, and they got married this last week on a Tuesday afternoon at the church, and I went down there. And as we were sitting there at the reception, her 3 brothers had come in from India, and one of them was I think he was even the best man, but he stood up to give the toast and said, I want you guys to all know that, yes, this is an arranged marriage, but they're not probably what you're thinking, at least not in modern times. And I felt like he was talking directly to me because I had completely the wrong impression. He said, let me tell you how this works. He said, nowadays, it's kind of the obligation of the men in the family, either the father or the brothers, if there are any brothers, to help the sister, if there is a sister, to find a suitable spouse. So they go about, whenever they meet a single guy, they kind of vet him out a little bit before they even mention anything to the future wife. And once they feel he's satisfactory, then they just make the introduction, and it's up to the wife whether or not she likes him. And in this case, it worked out fantastic. And as I was watching the happy couple and hearing that story, I was thinking about all the failed marriages that I've seen when all the way through the process, the family was warning either the husband or the wife, this is not a good choice. And kind of thinking, I wonder how much better it might work out for a lot of more traditional Western marriages if people did something like that. So that's it. That's my story. Showing how ignorant I am about that cultural practice. There is some value in that, I think. Maybe a lot of value. All right. Now for some Virginia trivia. If you've ever driven across the state line of Virginia or seen a Virginia license plate, you probably know that according to all those indicators, this place is for lovers. But apparently not all types of loving are permitted, as it appears there is a vulgar language ban in many municipalities. Many of them. Within city limits, no cussing. So I don't know if you can do that in private or not. I guess as long as no one told on you, you could probably get away with it. But I thought that was interesting. And they have some other weird laws, too. Like something about hunting raccoons only on Sundays before 10 a.m. or something like that. And I think every state has some of those bizarre laws still in the books. How many presidents can you name who are from Virginia? I'll give you a second to think about that. And the only hint I'll give you is that there are a lot of them. I imagine you probably get Thomas Jefferson. That one's kind of a gimme. And you may have also got George Washington. Those are the only 2 I probably would have guessed. But I did not realize that there are 6 more, making Virginia the largest source of presidents in the United States. So the others are James Madison, James Monroe, William Harrison, John Tyler, Zachary Taylor, and Woodrow Wilson, all from right here in Virginia. In 1804, George William Crump would become the first student arrested for streaking across a college campus at Williamsburg's William and Mary College. And Crump would later win a seat on the 19th U.S. Congress. And I'm guessing since nobody had cell phones back then, he was probably blackmailed by a very compromising and very well-detailed portrait of the incident, probably socked away in somebody's basement. And on that note, I always get a little bit nervous when I meet someone who also graduated from Florida State. I never like to tell them when I was attending there, just in case they may have some evidence of me in a compromising situation, which I'm sure exists out there somewhere. That's why I could never run for president either. But fortunately, they didn't have cell phones, at least not cell phone cameras back then. I didn't get my first cell phone until I got my first job. I graduated in 99, and then I got my first cell phone. And email really kind of became a thing while I was in school there. I remember our professors were trying to send out the homework assignments via email. But we're getting a little wind here. 6-knot tailwind. Looks like it's maybe gusting up into the teens. But yeah, that was a big deal. And that's back when it took forever to get on the internet. And then there weren't like any major email hosting servers. So it was just a total mess. Though not known as a big earthquake hotspot, a 5.8 magnitude timbalor in 2011 out here in Virginia was felt by 1/3 of the U.S. population, which probably sounds a lot more shocking than it is considering a very large portion of the U.S. population lives along the East Coast here. But apparently it was powerful enough to crack the Washington Monument. So that's something. On a more somber note, prior to the Civil War, Virginians owned more slaves than any other state, followed by Georgia, Mississippi, Alabama, and South Carolina, each of whom contained more than 400,000 slaves, putting that total at over 2 million just between those 5 states, an astonishingly high number that I did not realize was that large. And so I had to go and check out as a percentage of the U.S. population how many were slaves at that time. So in 1860, the population of the U.S. was around 31 million, and over 10% of that was comprised of slaves. That is astounding. And as many of you probably know, the James River empties into the Chesapeake Bay, which we'll see towards the end of our flight. But did you know it's also the site of a massive impact crater? You guys know I just couldn't help myself on that one. And though there are unfortunately, no visible remnants today, it was created about 35 million years ago by an object roughly 2 miles in diameter, creating a hole that was about 1 mile deep and 25 miles across. And it hit right in the water, right at the mouth of the river here. And even though you can't see the rim of it today, they think that's what helped shape the landscape down there. But since it was a water impact, they said it probably created a tsunami that went all the way to the Blue Ridge Mountains, which are about 100 miles west of here. That's crazy. And perhaps most significant of all these fun facts, Smithfield, Virginia is home to the world's oldest ham. Originally cured in 1902 before being lost in storage for 20 years. Upon its rediscovery by Gwaltney Foods owner Pembroke Gwaltney. Gwaltney, sorry. Maybe it is Gwaltney. I wrote both of them on there. Just say it real fast and nobody will know. But when he found that thing, he dubbed it his pet ham, complete with a brass collar and name tag, and then paraded the thing around the country to endorse the preservative qualities of dry curing. And you can still see it today, and it looks absolutely disgusting. Just imagine leaving a piece of dried out meat on the counter for 120 years or so, and that's about what it looks like. And speaking of old things, our next stop is going to be Jamestown, established on May 4th, 1607, and recognized as the first permanent English settlement in America. So take that, pilgrims. Those guys didn't arrive until 1620, just in case you haven't yet enjoyed our Boston flight, which you should definitely check out if you haven't seen it yet. That was one of my favorite flights. So the settlement party that came out here was comprised of 3 ships funded and sent by the Virginia Company from England, naming the location they selected after then King James I. And they were given very specific instructions about the location they were to choose, 3 of them, which were 1... Man, we are getting some gust here, aren't we? Well, this should be a fun landing challenge then. The first rule, it had to be surrounded by water on 3 sides to make it easier to defend. And when you see it up here, it looks like it's a little bit more of an island today. But I read they've had some washout, and when they were originally here, it was surrounded by water on 3 sides. And rule number 2, the water had to be deep enough to harbor their ships at the shoreline, And that's a pretty, it's going to be right up here, and you can see it comes to a little bit of a squeeze here, so I bet the current going through there probably clears out a lot of that and makes it deep enough to harbor there. And the last rule was that it could not be occupied by anyone of the Native American population, which you would think they wouldn't have to make a rule about that, but it was just men and boys. There were no women to bring any common sense to these guys, so that whole expedition was just men. So don't ever assume there'd be any common sense. So they found a spot that met all that criteria, which we'll see shortly just dead ahead of us, and constructed a large triangular fort within a month of landing, which they had a really hard time finding out where that was built. And I remember watching a documentary a few years ago about them searching for that. And they did find the location where they think it was, because they found a bunch of post holes and stuff, and they have since rebuilt what they think it probably looked like, and we'll see if we can spot it. I forgot to look on my test flight, but it's all wooden posts, so it's probably going to really blend in. So this is where the little settlement museum is now, and then over here somewhere is the fort, so we'll see if we can find that down there. And as usual, things didn't go well for the settlers, as famine and disease took their toll. But initially the local Powhatan Indians made the grave mistake of trying to help them out for a while, but even they got tired of their constant nagging and left them to fend for themselves. And the winter of 1609 would be remembered as the starving time, during which the settlers grew so desperate for food that they first ate all their work animals, and then started eating the leather off all their clothing and shoes and belts, and then started eating each other. By the spring of 1610, only a handful of the original party remained. They said maybe as few as 10 to 15 people. Saved only at the 0 hour by a timely arrival of a fresh shipment of supplies from England. And within just a few years, they got tobacco growing down there, and the old Virginia company finally turned a profit, and the rest is history, and lung cancer. But this remained a prominent location in this region. It served as the colonial capital for almost another 100 years before it was moved a few miles north up to Williamsburg, which is what's right up here. And it also enjoys the less redeeming distinction of being the first location to receive African slaves in British North America, and that happened in 1619. And today you can enjoy the Jamestown Settlement Living History Museum, which is what's going to be right down here, where they've built out a rough approximation of the original village, complete with live actors and a gift shop. And this is a little road that comes out here, and that is accurate. I looked on the map. That's what it looks like. Alright, so do you guys see that fort? Man, that's good. I think we're going to be too far away to see the fort. Boy, they got that pier right, didn't they? That's something that would usually be buried in the water. That looks good. All we're missing is a few boats. And I originally on my test flight had the ship traffic turned on, because as you can imagine by this port down here, there is tons of it, but I was having frame rate issues, so I had to turn it off. That looks wonderful, doesn't it? Really nice. Man, the scenery on this flight is amazing, aside from a few of those bad bridges. And we'll see a few more of them too, but this looks real nice. And I haven't yet seen the shipyard, and well, the shipyard didn't have a mod on it. But even when I flew over the default, you could see the piers and a couple of boats that didn't look great. But the port down here, the Port of Virginia, and the Norfolk Navy Station did get modded. And when I went by the Navy Station the first time, there was just one like transport ship sitting down there, but now we should see a whole bunch of Navy ships in there, so that should look pretty cool. And a little bit inland here in Williamsburg, there's a place called the Governor's Mansion, which is a little bit too far off the path for us to check out today. But that's the place where they moved I guess the political seat after they left Jamestown. And they got a bunch of gardens and a little mansion up there. And if you go online to their website, you can do a virtual tour, which of course I did, which was really cool. So you can check that out if you want to. And it probably looks accurate from the sim, because they have from the air in the sim, because they got a bunch of gardens and stuff, and judging by all the mansions and stuff we've flown over, they usually do a good job with those. And they got a little strip here. I think this is the Jamestown Williamsburg Airport there. If you need to come in for a little pit stop, the bridge looks awesome. And another strip out there. They got a lot of runways out here, and I did my best to not fly directly over them, but I didn't want to add another 30 minutes to the flight, just avoiding the airspace. Alright, so up next, and set back just a little ways from the water, we'll be able to spot some of the attractions at Busch Gardens, Williamsburg. And about 2 miles north of that, there's a big water park called Water Country USA, which is out here. And I didn't fly over that, so I don't know what it looks like. That's their parking lot there. The trees are obscuring it here. But that one, we will be able to see some of the stuff from Busch Gardens. And one of these days, I'm going to get one of those add-on packs for one of the Six Flags. I think they have six Flags add-on packs, freeware. And one of them from another one of my hometowns in Arlington, Texas. We'll probably load it up for that one, because I want to see what a theme park looks like when they've really done it up nice. And I'm shocked that no one's done one for the Orlando area yet. They've done the nighttime enhancement, which I'm not really a big fan of that because it kind of looks like a Christmas tree. They got all kinds of different colored lights that don't look natural. There's Busch Gardens there. So you can see a little roller coaster here, some water rides, and this whole area, here's their complex, and of course that's the parking down there. But not too bad as far as theme parks go. And this giant area here, I'm circling the whole area right now. This is really cool. This is the Yorktown Naval Weapons Station. And this place started life in 1914 as a dynamite plant run by the DuPont Company, acquired by the government in 1918 in response to the flare-up of World War I. And it eventually grew to the largest naval installation in the world. And today it's the munitions storage facility for the United States Atlantic Fleet and the Fleet Forces Command. And I'm not sure what Fleet Forces Command is, so if you're in the Navy, let me know what that is. And as you can see, it's massive. And they got all these little bunkers spread all through it here where they store all the ordnance. And I have to imagine between this and the shipyard we'll see in a minute and the Norfolk Naval Station, this place has got to be in a few crosshairs. But isn't that neat? I mean, you'd think it'd be like a big opened up area, but you got to drive through the woods and everything to get out there. But it is huge. Really huge. And looks fantastic, like everything else out here. Alright, right up here, as if ending one massive domestic conflict wasn't enough for the state of Virginia, they also ended the Revolutionary War here. That's the Yorktown battlefield, this open area up here. In October of 1781, British General Charles Cornwallis surrendered his nearly 8,000 troops to General George Washington. And that was the final straw for the English, who saw the defeat as reason enough to start negotiating an end to that conflict. And we'll see it better here in just a second once we turn. And though most of that battlefield was quickly eroded away because it was all earthworks, also the original stuff was built back up in 1976 and looks great and can be toured today, along with the Moore House, which is a little bit further out here, which is where the surrender negotiations occurred. I don't have the live weather settings on. I adjusted it to just the high cloud setting, and usually you just get like a 3-knot wind tops, but it's really rocking and rolling out here, which I don't mind at all. But that being stated, I didn't see which direction the wind was blowing on the runway, so hopefully I don't have a huge tailwind. Look at all these little earthworks down here. Look how good the detailing is. And I think the French were heavily involved in this battle too. They got some stuff here, and on the satellite map you'll see they got some stuff built up over here. But look at that. Look how good that looks. I love when you can see the elevation of these little hills. That is such a nice treat when they do that. And I think this may be a scenery seam, not a bridge. But you know what? Once again, I have not seen any tiling. We usually get that all over the place with these rivers, so maybe one of the recent... We didn't see any on that last French flight either. Maybe one of these recent world updates, they fixed a lot of that, because it's usually terrible. And that's a big petroleum depot, as you can tell. And I would say that might be a power plant, but I don't see any... Oh, well, there we go. Well, that must be a power plant, because there's the telltale electrical pylons outside of it there. All right, we're going to cut to the south over the town of Newport News, and it's Williamsburg International Airport. And the larger metro area up here is known as Hampton Roads, for those of you that are around here. And yes, this town has a funny name, and nobody is really certain, not Hampton Roads, but Newport News. No one's real certain about how that name came to be. The theory that I like the most is that news is derived from an Old English word meaning new town, likely applied after the whole area burned to the ground in the 1600s, of course. But another and probably more likely explanation is that it may have originally been called Newport Neuse, N-E-W-C-E, after a port in Ireland called Newstown. So I think that's probably the more likely explanation. And one of the main guys that came out to Jamestown with that original party, who went back to England to try to get some more supplies, his last name was Newport. So when you put it all together, that starts to make a little more sense. Look at this area down here. That looks a little bit dark, but that may just because I had to turn the terrain level of detail down a little bit, so there probably should be more trees out there, which would be covering that once we got closer. And I think this is Langley Field out here, which I believe has some affiliation with NASA, and that has nothing to do with the CIA, maybe named after the same person, but the CIA headquarters is up by DC. And then here's Newport News out here, or however you'd like to say it. And there's going to be a huge bridge that's coming across here, which does look good, but probably not true to life. And that's called the James River Drawbridge, and that was opened in 1982. And we're not going to be able to spot, I don't think, what the drawbridge portion of it is, but it's one of those types where it just lifts straight up. Like the whole thing lifts up. I don't think it doesn't have like a hinge where it comes up. But luckily it's low-lying and looks good, so it won't stick out as an eyesore. So along the tip of this peninsula here, this is where the Newport News Shipbuilders facility is. And that is the only place in the United States where aircraft carriers are built, and one of only 2 locations that build submarines. And we saw one of those 2 during our Connecticut flight along the Thames River. And yes, if you're from Connecticut, that's how you say it, even though it's spelled exactly like the Thames. Probably just as a finger in the eye for England. Just say it wrong. And you should check out that flight too if you haven't yet. Another one of my hometown flyovers. But Electric Boat, which is a General Dynamics builder, is the one out there on the Thames River. And before they were building carriers out here, this was the terminus of a railroad line that hauled coal all the way from up in the hills of West Virginia. In fact, it went down the Kanawha River, which is what we saw on that West Virginia flight. So they were pulling that stuff all the way down here, dumping it onto ships. And because there were so many ships, in 1886, the first shipyard was built to service all those transport vessels that were picking up the coal. But within 10 years, the place had already pumped out 3 ships for the U.S. Navy as well. And during World War II alone, this yard managed to pump out 12 aircraft carriers. In fact, that's the only thing they were making from 1940 to 1946. And on the wiki page I found for the shipbuilder, I got a list of all of the ships they've built here. And they've built probably at least one of everything. They got battleships, cruisers, destroyers, subs, aircraft carriers, obviously. They've done it all. Which again leads me to believe that there's probably some people that would love to see this whole area just disappear. Look at that residential area down there. It looks beautiful. Really, really nice. How are we doing on fuel? Alright, we're good. Alright, all of our gauges look good. I think we're in good shape. Man, I can't wait to see which direction that wind's blowing. So we're going to come out here, take a look at Newport News. And again, their piers look pretty good. Drive down here just a little bit to take a look at the Navy base, and then we're going to circle up here to check out an incredible fort. And then come right down here along this river, and then we're going to land here at their airport, which is right over in this area. So on the satellite map, it's blurred out in the middle. It looks like it kind of sinks into the water. You'll see at the end, but it looks like there's a drawbridge portion somewhere around here, and it looks like we're going to fly right over it. That might be at that little dark spot there. We won't be able to see it too well. And we're going to see 2 different underwater tunnels before we're done today. Here's one of them, which I can only assume was deemed to be cheaper than building bridges, and it's definitely cooler. And this first one up here is the Hampton Roads Beltway. And we turn back north, we'll see one that Google just called the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel, which makes a lot of sense. Maybe there was a bridge there originally before they built that tunnel, so there's the other one there. But I can't imagine the math that goes into figuring out. I mean, you would think tunneling under a river has got to be more than a bridge, but I'm not a civil engineer, so what do I know? Let's see, can we see that drawbridge? Nope. Alright, so when we get down here, you can see right next to it, there's a couple of what are probably aircraft carriers, and when we look at it on the satellite map, you will see a couple of them in various phases of construction down there. But these are kind of blurred, but at least we got to see the piers going out there. Yeah, these are totally flat and just blurred into the water there. Hey, look, they got some coal down here too, so they must still be hauling coal. Look at that. Oh, they got some other little stuff tied up down there too. Yeah, that doesn't look quite right, does it? But at least the piers are there. Alright, while we circle over to the Norfolk base, which I'll tell you more about when we come down and get an even closer look to it, I have got to... Actually, it's over here. I'm looking the wrong direction. Got a lot of little offshoot rivers up here. I've got to give a shout out to one of the mod developers. As I was pulling the stuff down for this place, I realized he has 4 pages of add-ons at flightsim.to, and his name is Freaky D. That's his handle. And as I was looking through all of his other stuff, I realized that we've probably used maybe a quarter of his work on our various flights. So I had to drop him a line and just say, hey man, thanks for all the work you put into it. All this great effort, and we get to enjoy it for free. So if you cruise through his page, which you should check out, he's got all kinds of stuff from all over the world. If you're using it, drop the guy a line. That's one of the things I love about the sim community. And I even love all you engineers out there that get on my case about not following procedure properly. I love it. I love the guy. We had just had a comment this afternoon. Someone was I mentioned that Alaska flight. I wasn't sure about the gear and flap speed. Someone even sent me a comment to let me know that too. It's just awesome. Love all you guys. It's so great. This is such a wonderful community. But as far as following procedure, I mean, I love it. I'm a nut for that kind of stuff, especially when flying the airliners. I'll sit there on the tarmac for 30 minutes making sure that thing's set up properly. But on my earlier channels that I had, people were just griping and griping. They just, you know, most people, you can look at, you know, if you're the creator, you can see what portions of the video people are watching. And a very large portion just watches takeoff and landing, as you can probably imagine. But I know we've got some diehard guys that like it for the educational component of this. And I want to try to please as many people as I can, but it's just hard to find that sweet spot. So thank you guys for all the comments as usual. And I never ever mind being corrected or modifying my knowledge, which is a nice euphemism for that. In any way, always invite it. All right, look at all these ships we got up here now. Yeah, this was just the only thing that was out here before, I think, was this one container ship here. All the piers were there, but look at all this stuff we got now. And this port down here is done up well. And then this other one down here is also going to be done up, I believe. So we're going to come down here, and the USS Wisconsin is tied up down here too, so we'll see if we can spot that. And I don't know if that was modified or not, but we'll check it out when we fly over there. But don't worry about not being able to get a good look at this when we come over. And this, of course, is the airstrip for this. And when I was looking at that, I went to the satellite image to check out what kind of planes they had down there, hoping to see some fighters, thinking they probably have a lot with all these aircraft carriers here. And there's at least 2 of them right there. And they said that place runs about 275 flights a day, a flight every 6 minutes, which is a lot. But when looking for planes, the only thing that was exposed were a bunch of AWACS, which are the things with those big radar dishes on top of them. I actually had a friend that flew in one of those for a while during the Middle East wars. And then they have a bunch of helicopters up here. We'll see if we can see any of those when we fly over. But no fighters. I didn't spot any at all. That looks really cool. Nice job, Freaky D. Looks really cool. That added a lot to it, because flying over this and seeing all those vacant kind of stunk. And more softball fields. Everybody playing softball. So our arrival airport will be, let's see, it's going to be this one out here once we circle around. Alright, can we see any of the helicopters? And I think for the, though there were no freeware add-ons for the airports, I think there was a freeware add-on for static planes at least one of the airports that we're either taking off from or landing at today. So if you feel like you want to add some static planes, but again, I was having some frame rate issues down here at Norfolk, and you can see we're having a little bit now. So I didn't want to add anything else to it other than the scenery. I don't see any helicopters, do you guys? I think they were all parked out here, but I'm not seeing anything. Which is fine, because they probably would have just made them flat. So here's the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel out here, and that looks fantastic, as you can see. You can't really see the depth of it plowing down underneath there. But that's where that is. But the bridge itself looks good, doesn't it? Alright, if you guys think you can handle it, we're about to check out Fort Monroe, which not only looks amazing, but is the largest fort ever built in the United States. And after what we just flew over, I think I understand why they did it. And it's going to be right up here on this point. And I should also add that the Potomac also feeds into Chesapeake Bay, so that goes up into that area there and runs all the way up to D.C. And the tip of this land here is called Old Point Comfort. And I think that's where the first guys that wound up going... You know what? It does go down there. Look, you can see the little tunnel. I think that's where the guys heading to Jamestown originally landed, right down here at Old Point Comfort. And the first fortification went up there in 1609, and that's just 2 years after Jamestown was established, for those keeping track. And this massive installment we see today was completed in 1834, and it was held by the Union for the duration of the Civil War, despite being down here in Virginia. Look at this huge moat going around it. We're going to turn right around it. You'll get a great look at it. Look at that beauty. After the war, Confederate President Jefferson Davis was imprisoned at this fort before being released without a trial after a 2-year vacation down here at Club Fed. And for anyone curious about what happened to old Jeff after the war, well, I was, so I looked into it. He spent a few years traveling in Europe with his wife before returning for a time to a home up in Tennessee before living out the rest of his days on an estate down near Biloxi, Mississippi. And then he died in New Orleans on December 6, 1889. And we all know where he's buried now, don't we? Back in Old Hollywood Cemetery. Look at that area down there. It is just flawless. Amazing. But getting back to Fort Monroe, and I'm going to see if I can peek under this little window here. Look at all that. Of course, that thing's right in the way. As the 20th century rolled around, it got the same treatment this place did as all the other coastal installations that survived the war. Gaining those all too familiar Endicott batteries, which you'll know all about if you saw that Boston flight. And again, you should check that out. It's a great flight. And though it was disarmed in 1946 after World War II, it became the location of several military schools for the U.S., and I'm guessing that's what all these buildings are probably for. And it was fully deactivated in September of 2011. Let's see if I can get my head down there so you can see it better. It's just, I'm going to have to slam my face into my yoke if I get any closer to it. Alright, now we're going to get a real good look at these ships as we come around. And I need to start, I'm going to try to get down to about 1,500 once we get past the naval station. And I'm going to go ahead and just set my altimeter for that so I don't have to fuss with it later. And there we go. Good to go. So I'll tell you a little bit more about this place now that we're going to see it from a little bit closer view here. It's currently the world's largest Navy base, berthing 75 ships along 14 piers and 134 aircraft at the base's Chambers Field, which is what we flew over before looking for our choppers. And I don't know how they come up with that number. I mean, it can't be a static number for the planes they've got in there, right? Or even the ships. But I guess, you know, Jacksonville used to be a carrier port for the Kennedy, I think. And they retired that. And now, I don't know what they have down there, but they're about to decommission or move 4 more big ships. So everybody in Jacksonville, down in that area by Mayport, is kind of freaking out because they're afraid it's going to hurt the economy, which it probably will in that area. Look at all these cars out here. These aren't super detailed, but I can appreciate that because if they were, and from this height you really can't tell, it would only add to the frame rate issues we're having around this area. So, oh, look at that. That must be like water camouflage. I wonder what they keep in there. That must be a pier that forgot to get colored. Let's check out these ports up here too. So this site saw its first, the air station saw its, or the base saw its first use in 1915 as a military location, and then saw limited use during World War I, and then things really got ramped up during World War II. And now it's the primary base of the Atlantic Fleet. Look at this pier down here. They got a nice big transport ship in there. These rail lines look good. Oh, we got some more camouflage down there. Alright, so let me start coming down. I'll pull our throttle back so we don't overspeed. Oh, these all look good. Boy, if I hadn't dipped the nose down, I wouldn't have seen that. Look at this one here. That looks great. We'll fly right over that one, but we'll probably get a good look at this one here. And that ship looks like it's got a little water on board too, doesn't it? Oh no, and some tiling. Oh gosh, I spoke too soon. But yeah, that thing looks like it's a little wet. Maybe it just rained. Turn on the bilge pumps. Alright, pull the throttle back some more. We're getting awfully close to overspeeding. Good job again, Freaky D. I can't tell you how much I appreciate it, because you know how those big cranes look. They just look like big, jagged, weird blocks sitting there if no one's touched them up. And this looks great. And this huge, filthy, beautiful railroad terminal is Norfolk Southern's Lambert Point Yard. Need to slow down even more. And that looks fantastic too. And I think once we get past this area, especially with this port up here, it's going to be just the default stuff. So my hopes are not high for it looking really, really good. And then we'll see if we can see the Wisconsin. And if I ever visit this area, I am definitely checking out the Wisconsin. I've never toured a battlefield or a battleship before. Toured a lot of battlefields. But I definitely want to do that. That's on my bucket list. And that thing was retired fairly recently. It actually saw some action during Desert Storm, lobbing a few artillery shells and a bunch of cruise missiles over at Kuwait when we were doing that deal. Look at this port down here. Ooh, that looks real nice. This over here looks a little bit odd. Not sure what that is, but this area here looks fantastic. Wonderful. Alright, so that's the Wisconsin, and that doesn't look like it was really touched up. If I hadn't told you that was it, now that you know it's a battleship, you can kind of tell with the stack sticking up there. Oh my gosh, look at all this down here. Look at all that. You just don't see that level of detail with this little stuff. That looks really nice. Wow. So the only military ships I've been on, when I lived in Connecticut, they had the Croker, which is a World War II era sub down in Groton by the sub base. I went on that, and boy, was that an eye-opening experience. Man, if you've never been on a World War II sub, eesh, can't imagine serving any amount of time. I mean, I got claustrophobic. I'm not usually claustrophobic, but I was ready to get off that thing by the time we'd walk through, and I was a lot younger too. And we had like an au pair or a nanny or something that lived with us we weren't that well off, but my mom worked a lot, so we had a lady that was living with us for a while, and she was dating a guy that was on one of the subs at the proper sub base there in Groton. And I got to go on the skipjack, which I think was a fast attack sub. That crane looks great. Interesting colors on that. So that was cool. And even as a little kid, they said you can go in this area and look at this thing and then get off. So a lot of that stuff is top secret. And the only bigger ship that I went on was the Yorktown. I lived in Charleston for a while, and they've got that moored over there, and that's a museum now. And that thing has a cool history, too. That thing saw a lot of action in World War II and almost sank. And there were some old guys giving tours that had served on it, and that was really, really cool. But I would love to go check out a battleship. Yeah, this stuff here doesn't look real phenomenal, does it? But man, everything on the ground looks incredible. Just amazing. Look at that. They got the detailing of all this stuff. They could have made that flat. They didn't. It's great. Big cemetery. We flew over a lot of cemeteries today, many of them holding the remains of a lot of the Civil War guys that died out here. That was cool. What a great flight. Man, thank you for that recommendation. Really cool. I kind of had it on my list, at least this area, but I'm glad we took the whole flight because there was a lot to see between here and Richmond. So once we get down on the ground, as always, I'll pull over a little nav map, give you the satellite view of everything we were checking out. Let me get my flaps going here. And turn off the autopilot. And then we'll wrap this up. And I've got something real cool in store for you guys. I don't know how great it'll look. I've flown out over there before. But with everything going on in the Middle East, I thought it might be interesting to fly over the Gaza Strip. So we can kind of spatially figure out where everything is that we're seeing on the news all the time. And if you saw our Jerusalem, our Holy Land tour flight, you know the scenery out there is not real good. But I think when I flew over Gaza before, because I wanted to see if it just looked like nothing but rubble, which is what it looks like most of the time. It definitely does now. It was mostly just default scenery, but I'll take a flight out there, see if it looks cool enough for us to just check it out. And at least we can get our bearings when we're hearing all this horror of stuff going on in the news. Alright, I gotta slow down some more. Slow down and come down. And I'm not sure where the GA parking is for this place. It looks like the terminals are up there on the left, so we'll just find a convenient spot so we don't have to drag this out any longer than necessary. Man, guys, this is just... look at these neighborhoods. Beautiful. So good. Alright, how's our... Alright, we got about a 6 knot... Well, we probably should have come in from the other direction, but I think we'll be able to pull it off. But I'm getting blown a little bit, so let me come over this way some. And out that direction is Virginia Beach. For all the Virginia Beach goers. Pretty popular spot. Looks a lot like Daytona out there. They got all the big hotels and condos and everything out there. And hopefully we won't get a lot of stuttering. On my test flight when I came in here, it got pretty bad. Not sure why, because as you can see, I don't have any planes down there. And I just saw that Any Builds has released a... I don't know if it's an amphibious plane, but it's definitely a water plane. But it's only available on their site for right now. So we'll have to see if we can... look pretty neat. We'll have to see if we can find a place to fly that thing around. But we got other spots we got to check out first. Alright, the wind's dying down here as we get close to the ground. I think we'll be okay. Get on down, baby. There we are. Okay, well, I might be able to stop right here for this taxiway. Flaps up. Oh, I'm just going to cut across the grass. Alright, all you guys that are sticklers for the rules, close your eyes for a minute. Yep, you see that? We're getting some stuttering here. Maybe it's all those cars I stuck over there. I'll go park in the parking lot for the cars, since I don't know where else to go. But I don't want to sit in the middle of the runway. Really, really cool flight. That was very interesting. Man, I don't know what the heck happened with YouTube, but that Alaska flight, we've had more views for that flight than probably our last 6 combined. Not sure what's going on with that, but I'm awfully appreciative of it. Whatever YouTube did to let everybody know that's out there. Alright. And interestingly, that wasn't really one of my favorite... The plane was cool. We were flying that new 850, but it wasn't one of my favorite flights. Those cars look a little funny, don't they? Okay, so let's shut this thing down. And get our parking brake on. And I'm going to turn off all the electronics so we don't have to listen to the whining and buzzing. And here comes a little nav map. All right, so just so you know where we are in the world, if you're not from the old US of A, here's DC up here, New York, Long Island, New England's up there. Come down the coast, we've got Charleston in this area here, and of course Florida down there. And here's where, while I'm thinking about it, the crater impact center is right about here. And they said the outer ring of it would have been right about like this. And just to give you an idea of how far that tsunami would have gone, here's where the Blue Ridge starts up here. Can you imagine that? Yeesh. All right, so getting back to Richmond. There's where we left from. We came up here. First stop was the Richmond Raceway, which looked just like that. And there's their little tower there with the LEDs all over it. And then came over here to the Diamond, which is the minor league park. And again, I think the college is somewhere down in this area. It's not all the way by downtown, but it's not right next to it either, at least according to the map. So if I'm wrong about that and that's your alma mater, please forgive me. And then here's that tower that had the Carillon of 66 bells in it. And all you can really see is the shadow of it here since we're looking right down on the top of it. But you should check out a video of that because you don't see things like that very often. And here's Maymont. And again, if you get the right angle, the mansion looks just like that in the sim. So it's pretty cool. And I didn't think to see if we could spot those gardens. But this whole area is a big park now. And then here's Hollywood Cemetery over here, which is giant. And here is where Jefferson Davis is buried. And then this is called the President's Circle, though I think Tyler was the only one buried there, but maybe it only takes one to become a President's Circle. And Tyler, interestingly, was also the first president they tried to impeach unsuccessfully. But they tried to give it a go, and today, unfortunately, that's pretty much standard operating procedure for Washington. All right, there's the Capitol building, and then there's that Coliseum again, and let me know if you know who plays in there. And as we came down to our forts here, so the line, you can kind of see how they're all lined up here. The line of trenches would have kind of gone up like this, and it went all the way up to Richmond. So they were trying to block off all the railway traffic getting up there, and they succeeded in doing that. So let's take a look at the forts that we saw. The first one, which is a little bit more open in real life than it looked in the sim. This is Fort, what was that, Harrison? And if you flew right over it, you can kind of see the discoloration of the earthworks here, but that's what that looks like. And this is that part I was talking about, like a little walkway. So I don't know if they left some of the trench lines in there or just rebuilt them or not. But look at this. This is Hoke. It's like right in somebody's backyard. Look at that. And it's really, really hard to spot that in the sim. I had to do a circle over on my test flight, and I could see it, but it's really hard to spot. But if you get right over it and look down, you might be able to make it out. But imagine having that in your backyard. I'd love to be a kid and have that there. And then here's that wonderful looking little power plant that we had, which looked fantastic. That might have been one of the best looking power plants I've seen in the sim. And then here's our prisons. That looked kind of close to that. This area here was all filled in the sim, but that looked pretty accurate. All these fields, of course, were spot on. This was spot on. This is the munitions and recovery training facility. And then here's all their shooting ranges down here, which looked great again. And then we came down here to some more forts. This was Stedman and Haskell down here. This is the, I think it's Petersburg. It's not Peterson. I typed Peterson for some reason. And you can see they left some of these trench lines too. That might be a drainage ditch there because that would be weird looking for a trench line, but maybe it is. And then here's where the crater was, where those guys went and blew the big hole up and then all wound up dying once they got down inside of it. So, and there's not a real big crater there now, but even on Google it says the crater. That's what this park is called. So there's a little mound of some kind. I don't know what it looks like from the ground. And then two more forts out here. This was Fisher, the one that was very easily defined, but it is the same color as this field over here. So if you're trying to spot this one, you will see this big building right here in the sim. Looks just like this. Just look right over from that corner, and that's where you'll spot it. And then you can also see these two things here in the sim as well. That was Welsh down there. And then we took our little fun facts and figures about Virginia conversation over here, and I told you about arranged marriages in case you're thinking about maybe that for some of your kids. It seems like a good idea. And then here's Jamestown. So originally, I think that this was joined to the land. That's what I read. So this has been washed out since then. And over here, let's see if we can find that fort, because you can definitely see it on the Google map, but it's marked on the Google map, which makes it a heck of a lot easier to see. It's down there somewhere, but it looks very much like the rest of the landscape because it's all big wooden poles. I don't see it, but that's that. And then over here is the governor's palace that I was telling you about before, and you can see those gardens there and stuff. It's not a really big facility, but if you're into old buildings with a lot of history, go and check out their virtual tour. That was really neat when we saw that on there. And then over here is Busch Gardens, which look pretty good as far as theme parks go. And boy, that thing's nasty looking in it. And then here's the water park up here. And if you flew over it, if nothing else, I'm sure you could probably spot their wave pool. You can always see those in the sim. And then here's that the naval weapons facility. Look how big that is. And that looked just like that in the sim too. Just perfect. That is massive. Look at all that. I mean, you'd think they would just put them a little bit closer together, because obviously it was okay to put some of them close together. But the effort to get out all these, you'd think they would just stack them closer together. But maybe if one blows up, the whole place doesn't blow up. Maybe that was the idea with that. And then here's the Yorktown battlefield where the Revolutionary War drew to a close. And that looked just like that in the sim as well. I think we were flying a little bit too directly over this area here to see these, but we definitely saw that. That wasn't as well defined in the sim, but that looks pretty cool too, whatever was going on there. And that Moore house where they did the treaty is out here somewhere. And then we came down to Newport News, and there's where the drawbridge is. Here's the drawbridge part of it. You see that right there? And I don't know if they have another one over here, but it's kind of blurred out, so we can't see it even if it's there. And here's the shipyard. And you can see they got at least one carrier. There's another one over there. And I think on the Google map, they have one that's much earlier in production. I don't even think the flight deck's on it yet. If you want to check that out in Google, there's our coal heap. And then here's our tunnels. And before we get back down there, let's look at Fort Monroe. Also looked spot on. Just absolutely perfect. Man, that's neat. I want to go check that out too. It's probably about a 10-hour drive from Jacksonville. I'm going to go up there and check that out. Take my whole family up there. And here's the naval base, which had even more ships in the sim. So we really got a treat with that one. And the shipyards down here. Norfolk Southern's Railway Depot. All of these ports looked fantastic. And here's where there's another little fort here, which is really hard to see in the sim. But if you want to try to spot it, this is Fort Norfolk right here. But it's surrounded by all kinds of stuff on the ground, so it's hard to see. And then here's the Wisconsin down here. Look at that baby. I'm going to check that out too. That's definitely on my bucket list. And then we came in for our approach. And that was it. Absolutely fantastic flight. So much history, so much to see, so much to talk about. Had a blast, as always. And that's it, guys. Stay tuned for our, if Gaza looks good enough to fly over, I'll do that probably over the course of this weekend. We'll do a little short hop flight and check that out, see what all's going on out there. Can't wait to see y'all again in the skies. Later.